Week 17 of Aon's Public Affairs podcast was recorded July 29th, 2020.
Hello and welcome to Aon's Public Affairs podcast. Daniel Serota from Aon Chicago. Well, I'm excited to be joined by my ex-boss, a member of Congress back in the day from Congressional 10th District of Illinois, now a partner at Forbes Tate, Bob Dold. Bob, welcome to the podcast.
Daniel, it's great to be with you and always a pleasure. It's great to hear your voice and obviously excited about the podcast. Congratulations on your success.
Well, thank you. Week 17, we're continue to grind. COVID has continued to happen. You know, as you know, Bob, we're currently in a pandemic. There's a lot of stimulus money that has already gone out through the CARES Act. The HEROES Act got introduced early June, $3 trillion bill. The GOP on Monday released the HEALS Act that is also $1 trillion. We all know there's going to be negotiations. What does the current public policy landscape look like right now?
Well, Daniel, I think you hit the nail on the head when you're looking at the big packages that have been introduced, and that kind of sets the stage for what the negotiations are going to be. So the HEALS Act, which is Health, Economic Assistance, Liability Protection in Schools, hence HEALS, is what the Senate Republicans just rolled out. And some of the big key provisions that they're looking at there is they're looking to make some changes to the Paycheck Protection Program to permit certain businesses to get potentially a second forgivable loan. And also to expand the types of expenses which businesses can use. Liability protections for claims of personal injury caused by exposure to the coronavirus. Continued enhanced federal unemployment insurance benefits. That cuts it back down from what is currently $600 a week, additional dollars, to $200 for the next 2 months, and then to 70% of what would be the lost wages. So obviously that's going to be a sticking point as well. So, and then they're looking at a second round of direct payments of $1,200 per individual, an enhanced, employee retention tax credit, incentives on increased production for certain medical equipment, those types of things. Streamlined federal student loan, and you've got $306 billion in that package for emergency appropriations going to schools and to localities. So, that's what the package is. You saw kind of an immediate pushback by, the Democrats, Senate Democrats, that it wasn't nearly enough. And so that's where I think we find ourselves right now, is because the end of the month, in just a couple of days, the unemployment portion of that is going to expire. So nothing kind of motivates and moves Congress more than deadlines and cliffs. And this is one that's going to impact a huge chunk of people. And so also put that in the background of August recess. So the House is about to recess at the end of this week to go off for the entire month of August. The Senate's in for another week beyond that. So I think really as you're looking at negotiations, the big pushback on those negotiations is going to start with the liability protection. It's going to be not enough money that's going to the states. And also you're going to have the unemployment insurance are going to be the three big pushbacks that you're going to have from the Democrats. So right now you've got $3 trillion that was proposed in the HEROES and $1 trillion proposed in HEALS. And I think the compromise is obviously somewhere in the middle. I see it happening closer to the $1 trillion than the $3 trillion.
And Bob, with that, you brought a little bit up on the timing aspect. Do you see this extending through August recess? Do you think they're actually going to have an August recess? And can you kind of talk about, as an ex-member of Congress, how the negotiation side of this works? Because I think, we're in a different time and people are needing money or needing these dollars quicker than ever as we're currently in a pandemic. Would love to hear more about the negotiations.
The negotiations at this point in time are going to go to a very high level. And so what's going to end up happening is that you're going to get the leadership of the United States Senate. So you're going to get McConnell and Schumer and the other leadership on the Republican and Democrat side from the Senate, the Republican and Democrat leadership in the House to start negotiating. The White House is going to weigh in. Obviously, we know we've got an election that's, under 100 days away. And so this is going to be very important how this happens. So you're going to see pressure from the White House in this negotiation. And it's all butting up against, an August recess. People are looking to get back. We're in the midst of a pandemic. They don't want to be in Washington any longer than they possibly have to be. And so ultimately there's going to be some back and forth, and it's going to be weighed out in the media because they're going to try to blame the other side, regardless of what side, you're on or what perspective you're coming from. The reason why it's not going well is the other side is dragging their feet.
That's extremely helpful. And I think overall, we are going to see a little bit of a drag out. But to your point, people do want to get back. They want to make sure they have an August recess to be with their families. So we could see a little bit of an urgency here to get a deal done, which let's hope.
Listen, I want to just say that there's no question that there's going to be pressure to get a deal done because nobody wants to have to go back to their constituents and say, by the way, their unemployment insurance, that's not going to happen because we just weren't able to get things done. So there's going to be huge pressure for maybe it's going to be a pared down bill, not what has been proposed on either side yet, but trying to tackle some of these things. Certainly unemployment insurance, because it impacts so many people, that's going to be top of the list, certainly for congressional leadership to try to tackle this problem, as well as the White House. But that's going to be the leverage point to try to get liability protection, which the Senate Republicans are really looking for, and some of the other provisions that they see as key. And the extension of the PPP could be a part of that.
So, Bob, you brought up the election. So let's switch gears here for a little bit. We're about 95, 96 days away. What are some key steps that you see? We just talked about the heels, but down the road, August, September, October, some key things that we could also see upcoming.
Look, we're operating in a different environment than we've ever operated before. I guess we could go back to the Spanish flu back in the early part of the 20th century. But ultimately, as we look at this presidential election, it's definitely done more online. We see Vice President Biden that is not on the campaign trail. We've seen the conventions canceled for all intents and purposes for what we're generally used to. So you're going to see a vastly different type of a campaign, which I think actually benefits Vice President Biden. Fewer opportunities to be on the road, fewer opportunities for potential gaffes. He's got a significant lead in the polls. Where I do think you're going to find some effort is going to be focused on, the Midwest in terms of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. That is going to be absolutely critical for the Democrats as we look at what happened in 2016 versus what's going to happen today in this upcoming election. I mean, look, 107,000 people is the difference between a Donald Trump presidency and a Hillary Clinton presidency. Just a little bit over 11,000 votes in Michigan. And you factor that into play, there's a bunch of different factors that are different today than they were back in 2016, I think giving Biden an edge, a fairly significant one for that matter.
Yeah, and Vice President Biden this week was supposed to pick his VP. They punted it another week. Who do you think is going to be the pick? And then kind of the why. As we've seen in past elections, there's always been the reason to try to hit a key constituency. You brought up Midwest, Wisconsin, Michigan. Some of those key states the Democrats lost in the previous years. Where do you think this is going to go?
Well, I think the key for Vice President Biden is to be able to, this is one of the critical first decisions that he's going to make. A lot of the energy on the Democratic Party is going to be on the far left, the more progressive wing of the party. The other thing that we saw in the primaries, Vice President Biden was on the ropes. Bernie Sanders had, a bunch of the momentum until South Carolina. And the African-American vote and Jim Clyburn, who came out to endorse him as the elder statesman from South Carolina, and a leader in the African-American community, made all the difference in the world, shifted the tide, momentum started coming to the vice president. And so Vice President Biden went from there. He's already decided it's going to be a woman. I think this is the one that's got everybody talking as to who is going to be that individual. I think that Amy Klobuchar, who just took herself out, also has been pushing to have Vice President Biden take a woman of color. So that's where you see kind of where is this going to be? And some of the big people that you have heard about and talked to, you've got Senator Kamala Harris from California, which would be a safe pick. She ran for president, has been vetted. So there's not like a whole lot of new stuff coming from the media saying, is there something, potentially, is there some dirty laundry? Is there something else that we don't know about Kamala Harris? Val Demings from Florida. Florida is going to be a big in-play state for this election. And, Val Demings was part of the impeachment process, so got an opportunity to introduce herself to the American public and certainly to the the Democratic Party in that venue. Stacey Abrams from Georgia, who is a rising star in the Democrat Party, also has been talked about. And then you've got somebody like a Karen Bass from California, who is the head of the Congressional Black Caucus, is somebody that I wouldn't necessarily count out. But I think the key for the vice president is to make sure that this is thoughtful and someone that could take over should something, happen to the president. That's what the key for this is. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference in terms of delivering a state. This is going to be an individual that will be on the campaign trail, and I think out there far more than what we've seen in the past, only doing it from an online format, trying to do as much of that as possible. So I think those are at least some of the people that I would keep in mind. And I'd be, it's kind of, you can generally pick them. I don't think California is going to be one that's going to be in play for President Trump. So it's really about who is the best fit for Vice President Biden. And honestly, the polls have talked about Elizabeth Warren, but I think he's probably going to choose, if I were a betting person, he takes a woman of color.
Well, look, thank you, Congressman Dold, for coming onto the podcast today. Very much appreciate your leadership and insight on what's happening in D.C.
Daniel, it's a pleasure. I hope everybody stays healthy and safe, and I look forward to coming back on another future podcast.
Next week, we will be joined by John Miner, national practice leader. We're going to be discussing political risk on a global landscape. Please hit the subscribe button below. We are on Apple and Spotify. Look forward to seeing you next week, week 18.
This information is a resource for Aon clients and business partners. It is intended to provide general guidance of potential exposures and is not intended to provide legal, regulatory, or medical advice. Due to the dynamic nature of infectious diseases, Aon cannot be held liable for the guidance provided. We encourage listeners to seek additional information from credible sources. Thank you.